Welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas podcast. My name is Danielle Harvey and I'm the festival director. FODI started in 2009 and is the original Disruptive Ideas Festival. FODI exists to bring to light important conversations that push the boundaries of conventional thought. In a time of turmoil, what happens when art and politics collide? From prisons, refugee camps and war zones, artist and journalist Molly Crabapple has documented the astounding courage of people living in the worst possible circumstances. Crabapple wonders whether art is sharp enough to cut through razor wires. Is it time to move art out of galleries and use it as a real agent for change? This is the FODI 2016 session, From the Frontline.
Before starting, I want to acknowledge that the Festival of Dangerous Ideas is being held on the traditional lands of the Caragal clan of the Eora people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the land's traditional custodians. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. I wish to acknowledge that this land is and has always been a place of art. Art, that word so fragile and so powerful. Art, a refuge that is as small as a sketchbook. Art, a sledgehammer that can break down walls. This talk is called From the Frontlines, so I'll start by telling you about an artist that lives on just such a front line. The front line of the refugee crisis, which is the war by the rich world to keep the citizens of the poor world from coming in. This drawing is by a man named Ali, who uses the pseudonym Eden Fish. He is Iranian, he is a refugee, he is 24 years old, and this year he received the Cartoonist International Rights Network's Award for Courage in Cartooning. And he spent the last 3 years, 1/7 of his life, in the detention center on Manus Island. This is some of his work. At Australia's detention centers, inhumanity is the official policy, and at the cost of $430,000 a year per refugee, Australia creates an artificial hell, something that exists to break people like Ali, so that more refugees or more migrants from the poor world don't come. Ali lives in a wasteland of tents surrounded by razor wire. Each day is the same as the last. And because Manus is largely off limits to journalists, Ali, Eden Fish's work, provides a rare glimpse of life on that island. It's cost him, and as his profile has grown, Eden Fish has been beaten, harassed, and denied food. Yet we live in the age where the world is connected, and Ali, Eden Fish's drawings have made their way onto the stage of the Sydney Opera House, even as he himself is still trapped in the detention center on Manus Island. Like all detention centers, Manus is built to erase those inside of it. But art is a slippery thing, and each of Ali's drawings is a defiant assertion of his existence. Each of them asks the viewer, what can art do now? Is art sharp enough to cut through razor wire? Is art strong enough to bash down walls? Can art change the world? I ask myself these questions too. Since I was 4 years old, I've drawn pictures. Art is my obsession and art is my dream. Art is my air and blood. My sketchbook is how I consume the world. Over the last 4 years, I've also worked as a journalist. More than that, I have fused art and journalism together, and I've taken my sketchbook around the world to prisons, refugee camps, and war zones, documenting the work of people of astounding courage, living in the worst possible circumstances. Now, when I sit at a refugee camp, I feel like I have to make the case for art. What is the point of all this? What is the point of making pictures in a world so full of hell? I'll start by talking about my own journey as an artist. I was a bad kid at school and a bad student. I spent much of my high school in a punishment called in-school suspension, which involved being locked in a small room and staring at the wall for 8 hours. I dropped out of university to work as a go-go dancer and a low-rent naked model, and it was better training than any art school, or than journalism school might have been. Trouble is the best school for an artist. Nothing is more boring than someone who has spent their life obediently advancing by complying with the dictates of those in charge. Art meant many things to me, but the first thing it gave me was the privilege of seeing. To draw, you have to see things anew. You have to murder your stereotypes and do violence to your cliches. One of the most classical exercises in the world is drawing rumpled fabric. And why is this? Why do you draw rumpled fabric? Because when you draw that, your mind has nothing to fall back on. You have to see the fabric as it is. To see truly is drawing's first lesson. The second thing art gave me was it gave me a way to look back. Like many women, I started getting sexually harassed when I was 11. And as a protective measure, I learned to walk down the street with this blind, wall-like indifference. Drawing gave me the permission to look back. Later, as a model, my job was to be silent and look pretty. Working as an object taught me that there were no objects and subjects. No one is voiceless. There are just people who are deliberately ignored. By 2010, I was working as an artist chronicling New York's nightlife. I drew sex workers and performers, men and women as tough and glittering as diamonds. But I chafed against an artist's role. We were supposed to stay in our studios churning out these increasingly polished versions of our last piece until we died. We were like Fabergé egg makers pretending to be revolutionaries. I longed for engagement in the world. At a time of infinite photographic images, I wanted to prove that art had something to say. Then 2011 happened. It was a year of these ecstatic uprisings around the world, and so many of them are broken and betrayed now, but it's important to remember still how they were 5 years ago. In 2011, Occupy Wall Street set up camp a block from my apartment. I started doing posters and sketching protesters. To see my art on the street felt more vital than to see it in any gallery. I took the skills that I honed in nightclubs and I began applying them to documenting protest. They were the same skills, seeing truly and drawing fast, realizing that everyone is at once a subject and objects. Portraits obsessed me. What did it mean to capture a face through a medium as archaic as drawing? Art in New York suffers because of the idea that an artist can only do one thing. But the proper domain of art is everything. Nothing is off limits to an artist. An artist can capture beauty and pain, sex and war, soldiers and dancing girls. I see this in all the artists I love. This is Otto Dix. Dix was mostly known as the painter of decadent, dancing girl-filled Weimar Berlin, but he was also a young machine gunner in World War I. Dix's memories of the wars haunted him. He drew the destruction, the faces mutilated by skin grafts, the gas masks, the young people who'd lost their legs. He also drew the glittering capital of post-war Germany, the cabarets and the sex workers and the bankers gorging themselves. For Dix, there was no distinction. His art was big enough to encompass the world. In 2012, I got arrested at a protest. The art spurred me to do journalism because, for once, I wanted to talk clearly. And while art might be able to whisper, writing can scream. From then on, I started doing more and more work about prisons. And my first big assignment as an investigative journalist was covering the prison camp at Guantanamo Bay in the summer of 2013. That summer, when I first went to Guantanamo, Obama had recently announced his plan to close the base, but at that time, 153 men were indefinitely detained without charge. Over 100 were hunger striking. Of these, dozens were being shackled to a chair twice a day and having a tube shoved through their nose and into their stomach and a can of protein shake then pumped through the tube. The guards bragged that they let them choose their flavor. According to the chief prosecutor, only 20 men detained at Gitmo were even chargeable. Chargeable? Chargeable with anything, any crime. And the rest? They were mostly sold to America by Afghans eager for bounties, and all of them had been tortured. Now they were there, waiting, because America would not admit that it had done something wrong. Guantanamo was built on erasure. The military would not speak these men's names. it would not show their faces. To justify a crime that massive, they needed to make those detainees disappear. They needed to be boogeymen in orange jumpsuits, not husbands, fathers, sons, not men with favorite soccer teams or back pains or loves or grievances or possibly legitimate hates. In Guantanamo, I used my art to draw around censorship, to show the prison and the force-feeding chair. But most importantly, to show the individual men. When the military censored me, I made it explicit. Forbidden to draw the soldiers, I gave them death masks. Forbidden to draw the prisoners, during the 7 minutes I had to see them through a one-way mirror, I scribbled their faces black. Then I drew the men from their Red Cross photos. It was drawing to claw back the disappeared. Because prisons generally ban cameras, they make a natural subject for art, for illustration. And some of the most classic illustration has been done around prisons. During World War II, the American government interned between 100 and 120,000 Japanese Americans. The celebrated illustrator Mine Kubo was one of them. Mine spent 2 years at an internment camp in the Utah desert and made 2,000 drawings that she would later publish as a book. Her drawings showed the guards, they showed the lack of privacy, the daily roll calls, but they also showed people stripped of their homes, their businesses, and their purposes solely because of their race. Mine Kubo made intimate, pitiless portraits of daily life from the inside in ways that photos can't. Prisons and detention camps are traditionally some of the hardest places to document. War zones are different. By 2018, over 1/3 of humanity is projected to own a smartphone, and photo cameras are ubiquitous in war. Militants, civilians, NGOs, governments, every single person on every single side of a current war is likely to have a camera phone, and they're likely to use it to document their life. The Syrian civil war, in particular, has been a war that has been documented through every angle, from every perspective. In this environment of ubiquitous images, what is the place of drawing? What does art have left to say? These are from a collaboration I did, one of the ones of which I'm most proud. It's a collaboration with an extraordinary young journalist living in Raqqa. Marwan Hisham had just graduated with an English literature degree when ISIS occupied his hometown. Risking execution and arrest, he continued to tweet and then report on life under their rule. He reported about the executions, the arrests, and the destruction of culture, but also the quotidian realities of life under a religious fundamentalist and foreign occupation. Marwan sent me photos of daily life in Raqqa, and I drew from them. I drew the faces that were blocked out from advertisements because ISIS considers it idolatry. I drew kids digging through the trash for scraps. I drew Raqqa's famous clock tower. ISIS had beheaded the statues on top. Later, Marwan and me worked together for Mosul. He sent me photos of that city, including this one of a shop by a Christian that had been confiscated. The nun is to mark his religion. Like the internet itself, art defies censorship. In 2015, Marwan and I repeated our project in Aleppo. Aleppo is one of the world's oldest cities. Marwan had lived there for 12 years. It was the place he went to university. In 2012, its eastern half was taken by anti-Assad regime rebels. This half is now home to an estimated 300,000 people. It's been mostly reduced to rubble by the constant government bombings. The regime in Russia used their planes to target markets and hospitals, and water and power have been cut off. Neighborhoods on the front lines have become death traps, with snipers on both sides targeting civilians. This is all common knowledge, and yet the world has become numb to the Syrian war, except for that one time a year when a picture of a dead or traumatized child is in a photo that's aesthetically pleasing enough to satisfy Western sensibilities, and then people feel very bad about it. When Marwan and I tried to work together, we tried to show the human life that was going on in spite of the worst and most brutal circumstances. We tried to show defiance in the face of a world that seemed to have conspired to burn this country. In the West, the Syrian war tends to mean two things: ISIS and refugees. Millions of Syrians are currently refugees. While many Western countries, like my own, panic about taking a few thousand, the vast majority of these Syrians live in neighboring countries like Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan. Many live in camps in squalid conditions. They live amidst dust and tents with few schools. Since funding for Syrian refugees has been slashed, their rations have been slashed with them. And as the conflict drags on, their hope for a dignified future shrinks. And it's no wonder that hundreds of thousands have risked their lives getting on rubber life rafts to Europe. This fall, I had the honor of being invited by Doctors Without Borders to document their work in Iraqi Kurdistan at a refugee camp called Domiz. This camp was not one of the worst ones. It was run by UNHCR, and it was home to 40,000 mostly Kurdish Syrians. Over 5 days, I drew Doctors Without Borders maternity clinic, where they helped about 600 mothers give birth in the first half of the year, as well as their mental health work. But as I worked, the Syrian refugee crisis was dominating the news. Countless refugees would start their journey in Domiz. In collaboration with the MSF, I drew portraits of some of these families. I sat with them and I interviewed them. The families that lived in Domiz may have been born in villages in the Kurdish parts of Syria, but many of them spent their adulthoods in the great cities of Aleppo and Damascus. I met an aeronautics engineer and the former owner of a chain of souvenir shops, a high-end waiter and a graphic designer who built a small studio in which he painted women representing Kurdish freedom. Countless doctors, nurses, and community health workers at MSF were themselves refugees in Domiz. I visited 8 families that were planning to make that trip to Europe. Though each of their stories were different, each of those visits began in the same way. A young person would brew us coffee that was served in these frail, lovely cups. One of the parents would say that they had made the decision to leave. They knew the risks. They read the news, of course. Same news as we read. Some of them had neighbors that had drowned in the Aegean. They'd tell stories of selling their possessions to afford smugglers' fees, of following cousins across Europe via messages on WhatsApp, of asylum applications, of daughters who wanted to be doctors, and of sons who missed their soccer teams in Kamishlu. And as they spoke, I alternated between drawing them and writing down their words. I asked one woman what she would bring with her to Europe. She looked at me, smirking slightly at what an idiot I was. As a souvenir, I asked to remember. I left all my memories in Syria, she answered. For all of its importance, the word refugee is a flattening one. It strips individuality away, and it brings to mind instead these images of these huddled, weeping masses. Refugee evokes pity, and pity is a corrosive thing. In her essay, We Refugees, the philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote, "We fight like madmen for private existences with individual destinies." Arendt, who was a refugee from the Nazis, knew exactly of what she spoke. When these families decided to take that trip to Europe, they were choosing many things, but one of them was an individual destiny. They would not wait passively and tense for geopolitics to decide their fate. They would take matters into their own hands. Theirs was a longing to live. And I tried to draw them to show that. Now, because drawing has such a visceral impact, artists have been targeted by authoritarians around the globe. The Syrian cartoonist Ali Farzat had his hands broken by the regime early in the revolution, and Hitler was actually so incensed by the mean-spirited cartoons British cartoonists did of him that he had a hit list that he was going to do right when he conquered their island. Iranian cartoonist Atena Farghadani spent nearly 2 years in jail for protesting anti-birth control policies by drawing a bunch of government ministers as like donkeys and goats and chimps. Artists working in a documentary capacity are just as dangerous. In 1943, over 3 million Indians starved to death in a man-made famine in Bengal that was enforced by the British occupation. The Indian artist Chitta Prasad toured the province with his sketchbook. He interviewed victims of the famine, and he drew the human toll. When he published his series, Hungry Bengal, it was immediately banned. The British seized and they destroyed all 5,000 copies, and the only reason that we have these is because Chitta Prasad managed to hide his last single copy in his house. There's a journalistic cliche called giving voice to the voiceless, and I despise it. This is generally a lie. There is no such thing as a voiceless person. We all come equipped with a voice, and when someone seems voiceless, they're usually being ignored or deliberately silenced. The stories that always attract me are the stories of smart people fighting against oppression, fighting against the odds. And these people, they could be prisoners in solitary confinement, blowing the whistle on abuse, or they could be workers organizing for their rights. One story that stayed with me for a long time was when I wrote about migrant construction workers in Abu Dhabi. They were mostly South Asian men who were building branches of the great museums there, the Louvre, the Guggenheim, for 14 hours a day for $200 a month. Articles about workers in the Gulf do a good job talking about the abuses they suffer. They talk about the debts that workers accumulate to labor brokers. They talk about how when these workers arrive in Abu Dhabi, their passports are confiscated, how they're paid less than they're promised. But they seldom talk about the workers' resistance. In a place where striking is punished by arrest and deportation, there are dozens of strikes a year in the construction industry in Abu Dhabi. I would never have been able to do this article without the help of one such worker, a young man who taught himself 5 languages and has helped the media cover the abuses in his city at massive risk to himself, because he couldn't stand living in a place where, because he was a blue-collar South Asian man, he was presumed to have no brain. I couldn't draw his face, so I drew him reading his favorite poet. In art as in life, pity is a corrosive force, and at best, pity inspires charity. But charity positions the giver above the person given to. It keeps power structures in place. And so I always ask people to reject charity and to choose solidarity instead. I spoke about how art can kill stereotypes. And this is more important now than ever. By seeing truly, clearly, and emphatically, we reject the hatred embodied by politicians like Donald Trump and Nigel Farage and Marine Le Pen. It's also the first step to overcoming the more polite and bureaucratic hatreds embedded in our courts, our prison systems, and even detention camps like Manus Island. This summer, I had a chance to illustrate both parts of that machine, the lurid and the covert, when I drew the Republican National Convention. Now, this was the opposite of the work that I had done in Dubai or in Kurdistan. Here, you had every single layer of unreality all piled on top of each other into a sort of ladder that Trump, this tangerine Mussolini over here, would climb to become the president, or try to. You had 15,000 members of the media all piling on top of each other, desperately looking for violence, or at least a protest with a lot of people shouting at each other. Real activists mostly stayed home. They were put off by the tens of thousands of police that had been trucked in from all across the country, and by the pre-convention visits by the FBI. The convention center was a mess of red, white, and blue bunting. Outside, a guy in a rubber Hillary Clinton mask waved a sign reading Trump or Tramp, while down the street, dudes with guns, ostentatiously strapped to their thighs, listened to right-wing conspiracy hosts, and the Westboro Baptist Church screamed homophobic nonsense till their lungs went out. I drew and I drew. I drew because it was like the carnival of the damned. I drew the people who were shouting, "Jail Hillary," and "Bomb ISIS," and "Build a wall," and the protests and the counter-protests marching in circles like some sort of Scylla and Charybdis built on fear. I started going nuts halfway through. I sat in the local bar, sketching the TV screen as this neon-haired embarrassment tried to crown himself as king. And through it all, I kept asking, how do you even draw something that's already a cartoon? We live in this time of such flux and such contradictions. We are more connected, more able to communicate, to speak across borders, but with this connectivity comes economic ruptures and a dizzying sense of dislocation. Many people around the world are turning to right-wing nationalism, to tribalism rooted in a fictitious past that excludes everyone not like them from their common definition of human. You see it in Turkey, you see it in Russia, you see it in this new France that persecutes Muslims. You see it in post-Brexit Britain, and you see it in Trump's vision of America. To fight this fear of the other, we must see each other clearly. We must see those people that power does not want us to see. And maybe this is why I keep believing in art and believing in certain archaic forms like the portraits. Yes, there are flaws with images. It is usually unjust and random the way one image is chosen over another. Images can play on sentiment. They can make people forget about systems and reduce everything to a single feel-good story. But they also stand a chance of breaking through compassion fatigue and indifference, of making people see each other as if for the first time. I started this speech by asking, can art change the world? It can't. The pen is not mightier than the sword, let alone the predator drone. But it can make you see, and seeing is the first step. Art can make you see defiantly and disobediently. Art can convince you to look at wounds and ugliness and also beauty in places that you have been told none exist. It can make you interrogate others, but most importantly, it can make you question yourself. Art can teach us to reject the lies that break people down into simple heroes or villains. It can make us reject the dangerous simplicity the media feeds us and take a small step towards seeing the life and each other in all of our muchness. And that is why I still believe in drawing. We are crushed, shaped, and contorted by borders, wars, laws, and structures of power. Before we can improve anything, we must recognize our common humanity. Then we can demand rights for others and for ourselves. The Australian cartoonist First Dog on the Moon is in frequent touch with Ali, the cartoonist known as Eaten Fish. And I asked him to ask Eaten Fish if he wanted to say anything to you. And he wrote this statement. Life is not only about eating and having a sleeping place. Every human should be able to choose to live how they like. In Manus, there are no signs of happiness. It's a very bad feeling to be trapped somewhere, with nowhere to go and having to tolerate suffering. I used to complain about my situation, but I never got good results. So I decided to draw cartoons and show my condition. Doing the cartoons doesn't fix my hurt body. It doesn't fix anything. And so I ask again, does drawing have any help of changing things? And I don't know. But I know this. Maybe drawing can change nothing, but each drawing, each piece of art, can be one small crack in the walls of ignorance, of cruelty, and of cowardice. And maybe with enough cracks, those walls can start to come down. Thank you.
The Festival of Dangerous Ideas is presented by the Ethics Centre. The Ethics Centre delivers programs and experiences designed to bring ethics to the centre of our life. We offer counselling for individuals, leadership and development services, events, courses and educational resources. As a non-profit charity, we rely heavily on donations and memberships. Please visit the Ethics Centre website to find out more. Thank you.